Welcome to how to hook up an Aqara doorbell to your chime. You'll need a 24 volt transformer, a 24 volt chime, the Aqara T2 relay, and the Aqara doorbell. A 16 volt transformer might work, but it'll be underpowered for the relay. First, a brief overview of how chimes are normally hooked up. The transformer leads go behind your chime, basically. And then normally you also have another pair of wires coming from your doorbell. And this also goes into the same place. It goes into the area behind your chime. And usually these white wires, or one pair of these, maybe it's not the white ones, these usually get pigtailed together. And then in order to make this a switch, one of these wires is going to go to the transformer lug on the chime, and this other one's going to go onto front, or it could be the rear one. So now, when the doorbell is rung, a normal doorbell, not a smart doorbell, it completes this circuit for a second, and it causes the plunger in the chime to go up and down and ring the doorbell as it is energized and then de-energized. It makes a ding and then it makes a dong. So when we switch this to a smart doorbell, a couple things change. The first thing that changes is that the doorbell is going to leach some current at all times because it has a camera and stuff, right? And this is true of the Aqara one as well. The second thing is that if this was a non-Aqara doorbell, when you press this button, it would ring the chime via like a special adapter that these things usually come with that hook both of these two together. And usually there's like a puck here. And it modulates some current and does some other things. But Aqara doesn't work that way. Instead, Aqara wirelessly talks to its own little chime module. And I'm sure when you open the box, you'll see this. It kind of looks like this thing. And it just plugs into a wall outlet. And this is the thing that rings. So your chime goes unused. As a matter of fact, you can open up your chime box if you have an Aqara doorbell. And you can disconnect your chime completely and just pigtail these wires together here. That way the transformer just directly powers the doorbell. In fact, that's the first thing we have to do if we want to power this with a relay, the chime. So we need to figure out how we're going to do that. The key to making this work is with the Aqara T2 relay. This is a pretty neat little module, and it's basically a smart relay that can control up to 2 channels. So it could do 2 different things, and it can do some other stuff too. The relay normally takes in, I believe it's rated for 100 to 250 volts AC. It's also rated for a low amount of volts DC, about 24 volts, and we can take advantage of the internal rectifying circuits to basically feed the 24 volt AC from the transformer. I did some experimenting, and if you feed it the AC line, it seems to work fine. Normally a 100 to 250 volt AC circuit won't be able to rectify the low voltage into something that's usable, but I believe that because it can take low voltage DC, that it has some kind of logic in there that basically switches it to that low volt DC circuit internally. Whatever the reason, it ends up working. And it lets us do something neat. It lets us power this relay off of our transformer voltage. Now if you want, you can hook up this relay to your mains voltage, and this is critical because everybody's setup is different, so you're going to have to figure out what's most convenient for you. For example, you could put your relay out next to your transformer, wherever that is, and you could hook up your L and N lugs to 120 volts, and the relay will work just fine. Now, the problem with that is that usually that if you move the relay out by the transformer, you have to run another wire for your chime, right? Because the wire that we have is currently going to the doorbell. So if you have room, you may be able to put this relay next to your chime box or behind it or in the wall or somewhere more convenient. What that lets us do is it lets us basically pigtail into the lines that we already have in order to install this in parallel with the doorbell. And it's actually ends up being pretty simple. Basically, we're going to pigtail into the existing lines here. So once we attach the L and N here into the existing pigtails behind the chime box, the relay will now be powered on once we flip the breaker back on. Once you do this, you can go into the Aqara app and you can actually install this as an accessory. The key is that you need to make sure that this thing is in dry contact mode. By default, mine was in wet contact mode. That screwed some stuff up when I flipped everything back on. So get this thing installed once you have it hooked up like this, and get it, and in the app, put it into dry contact mode, dry, D-R-Y. And I picked dry pulsed, which is very nice for doorbells. So once you have this, really all you have to do is just wire in the chime. The relay now has this first channel as a switchable input now that it has power. So internally, when you go into the app and you do the switch, it basically closes this circuit between L1 and L out for channel 1. And so we can just wire up our chime pretty simply just by reusing these pigtails that exist. And we can take the transformer, we can pigtail it in up here on that first pigtail. So now all we need is the red line. We can't pigtail this second line directly into front. That will energize the chime. The plungers will be straight up and your transformer is going to get pretty warm while the chime just stays energized. What we need to do is we need to run it through the relay. And so we simply hook it up to L out over here, off that same pigtail up there, and then we run this little L1 over to front. So now what happens is in the app, when your smart relay closes channel 1, short these two together and you'll have a complete circuit. In dry pulse mode, you can pick how long the pulse is. And the shortest amount is 300 milliseconds, which is pretty good. It makes a nice little ding dong. So once you have everything pigtailed together and you tidy it all up, put it in the wall. That's the hardest part, honestly, is finding a place for the relay. You can slip the power back on. You can test everything out. You can go straight into the app and you can load up your little switch here and you can just hit switch 1 and you can immediately notice if your chime dings. Now, something that I recommend is to do your due diligence as you're putting everything together. You need to make sure that once it's all hooked up and you power and you throw the breaker and everything's back on, you're going to want to do some probing with a multimeter. The first thing you're going to want to do is come over to the transformer and you're going to want to probe these 2 points and you want to see 26 or 27 volts, give or take. And then when you ring the chime, it's going to drop down closer to 24 volts. It just needs to be above 24. If you start dipping too much on the voltage, the doorbell itself could restart, reboot. You'll be missing video and weird stuff can happen. So you want to make sure that everything's good. For my purposes, I had to upgrade my transformer that I had to a 24 volt transformer in order to have a nice healthy connection everywhere. If you do probe these transformer leads and it reads 0 volts, that means the entire circuit is energized and that means that your relay is probably closed. And so you need to double check that it's in dry contact mode. The other thing you can do is probe between L1 and L out and you should have a difference between those equal to the transformer's voltage. 24, a little bit above that. If it's 0, right, then this is energized. Unless you're ringing the doorbell, it shouldn't be 0. Some other things to watch out for are make sure that your doorbell, everything's hooked up to pigtails up here, right? So you should have like wire nuts on these 2 sets of wires up here. You don't want your doorbell hooked up straight to your chime. You don't want backfeed. You don't want voltage spikes and stuff to backfeed into the doorbell. We're trying to protect the doorbell itself, and that's why we wire it up in parallel like this. Some other things to check are if your chime, if it's a digital chime, so it doesn't do a ding dong, right? It can play like songs and stuff, then that 300 millisecond pulse isn't going to work. You're probably going to have to change it to be a on-off type relay to like 5 seconds, right? I used to have a digital chime and it played like a longer song. For that one, I would want the way the Aqara relay is going to work, right? I'm going to want it to be normal dry contact mode, and then when we set up our doorbell automation, it's going to be when the doorbell is ringing, channel 1 on, wait 5 seconds, channel 1 off, right? That way the chime stays energized for like 5 full seconds or however long the song is on the chime. So you'll have to mess with that. The last thing is if your relay's not really working, you might have to find a way to get mains voltage instead of that transformer voltage. I'm going to just recommend that you, unless you know what you're doing, probably just ask an electrician to give you a 120 volt drop. But keep in mind that by nature of being 120 volt AC, your relay now must be inside of a junction box. Whereas if you're feeding it low voltage, that's not really necessary. You can kind of have the relay anywhere you want. It could just be on a wall somewhere. And so really the only thing left is to program it. It should be pretty straightforward. You'll go into the Aqara app and it's going to be, you're looking for an automation. Under the when category, it's going to be doorbell ringing. So when doorbell ringing, then on the relay, channel 1 on. That's it. So when doorbell ringing, channel 1 on. If you're in pulse mode on the dry contact switch, that's all you have to do. The contact will automatically close. If you're not in pulse mode, then it needs to be channel 1 on, and then like, a 1 second delay, and then channel 1 off, right? You have to turn it off manually if you're not doing the pulse mode. But you should be able to figure that out pretty easily, because in the automation, you can just hook it all up, and then you can hit preview, and your chime should just ring if everything's working. And then you can modify everything, hit preview again, the chime will ring, and you can mess with all that. So yeah, this should get you all hooked up. Make sure that you don't have too much voltage drop as you're testing this. The things that you're looking for, you're looking for when the chime is going off, that the relay is not resetting or losing power. You want to make sure your doorbell out front is also not resetting, it's not losing power, because that indicates that your transformer is not up to task, or you could have old wiring or other things that need upgrading. That kind of stuff, you probably want to get an electrician or a low voltage technician to help you out, if you're not comfortable crawling around and running new wire. The last little note is, if you are in a newer construction house, you may not have red and white wires, or this is normally 18 wire gauge. This is the same as thermostat wire if you're shopping for it at your local home center. So thermostat wire or bell wire or doorbell wire. But you may have Cat 5 or Cat 6. And if you have Cat wiring, this is twisted pair wiring. It's a lot thinner. The way it works is you'll have 8 wires in total. You'll have a blue one, you'll have a green one, you'll have an orange one, and you'll have a brown one. And then you'll have a striped version of each one of these. And depending on who hooked up your doorbell and stuff, the contractor that did it, it's pretty decent chance that you'll only have one of these really thin wires hooked up to your doorbell, right? So let's say this is your doorbell, and they might have like the single blue wire attached and the single green wire attached. When you're doing all of this, it technically works, but as long as you're in there, better safe than sorry. And what I would do is I would pair these up. When you open it up, you're gonna have 8 wires total. You have the 4 solids, and then you'll have a striped version of each one, which I'm gonna just indicate with a white line, right? So you have 8 wires. And if you're going to run off cat wiring, I would double these up. So example, the line going out to your doorbell, hook up the blue and hook up the striped blue together. And then on the return path, hook up the brown and hook up the striped brown together. Right, so you're using 4 wires. So basically you're doubling up. You're doubling up, and then it'll act as if it is a thicker wire. And the reason that's important is that the relay and the chime, they have spiky current properties, especially the chime with the solenoids energizing. There's nothing wrong with the thin wire in theory. I think it can take about 1,000 milliamps, but chimes are going to be pushing maybe 500 milliamps at a minimum. Cat 5, Cat 6, it's thin, so double those up. Double up your twisted pairs and then treat them as a single wire when you're doing this. A nice advantage of Cat 5 and Cat 6 is if they ran this everywhere, that gives you more flexibility. It's going to be convenient for moving stuff to the front over by your transformer, like if you have your relay over there. The nice thing about the Cat 5 cable or Cat 6 cable is that you basically get 8 wires. And usually these aren't used. So you could have a couple wires coming to the doorbell feed, 2 wires for the doorbell return, and then 2 wires out to the chime. The other thing I want to mention is keep in mind if things aren't working, your relay, again, it might need the 120 volts. So it's not exactly indicated that what I did here is supported by Aqara, right? 100 to 250 volt AC is technically what the box says. If your relay dies or is underpowered or whatever, it could be because of that. I figure these relays are cheap enough, that it's worth trying this, and so far for me, everything seems to be working. So hopefully this video helps someone out there and gives other people something to build off of. Buy these relays and mess with them, and hopefully someone smarter than me figures out what they can do with it. Thank you for watching.